And with that historic summit underway in Alaska, U.S. President Donald Trump welcomed his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin earlier. The duo exchanged smiles, shook hands, shared a laugh, and headed to that closed-door meeting in the same vehicle. Here's a quick look at the key moments. And as we continue to keep a close eye on the latest coming in from Alaska, let's also get in some perspectives from Heino Klinck with us on the broadcast at this point. I have to begin by asking you for your assessment of what we saw, the body language on display by the two leaders, and the very fact that they are now in the same room discussing the Russia-Ukraine war. What are your expectations at this point? How optimistic are you really that this meeting will yield a significant breakthrough?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think what's important is that these two world leaders are in fact meeting in person, and I think this is the first step in a longer journey to hopefully what will be a ceasefire that will then lead to hopefully a long-term peace agreement. Now, there are a lot of things that have to happen before we get to that stage. And I think what's critical here is that President Trump is able to convey to the Russians that America stands firmly with its partners and allies, and that while he wants peace, and the United States certainly wants peace in Europe, the Russians are not going to have their way with Ukraine. Both warring parties will have to make some compromise. And again, as President Trump himself has said, this is an opportunity for him to personally assess the Russian leader. President Trump has met with Putin on more than half a dozen occasions, so they obviously have a history there. So we shall see what happens in these meetings now. But I want to be cautiously optimistic. But again, we've seen the Russians invade Ukraine more than 40 months ago, and the war is still raging. So again, the devil will be in the details.
Indeed, several aspects at play here, and we will be getting to them one by one. And one of them is what's been happening on the battlefield in the run-up to this meeting. And what is your impression of the Russian strategy at this point? In fact, we had that statement coming in from the Ukrainian president just a short while back, talking about that operation that's been underway on part of the Russian side, and what's really happening on the ground.
So let's first remember that Russia has been trying to defeat Ukraine militarily for, again, over 40 months now, and has been unable to do that. The Russians invaded in February 2022 and have been unable to defeat the Ukrainians, a country that pales in size, both geographically as well as in terms of population. The Russian population is more than 3 times greater than that of Ukraine. And the Russians have needed assistance, military assistance from countries such as North Korea and Iran. So the Russian military is in a precarious state. That being said, President Putin really does not care about Russian casualties. So he's willing to continue to send young Russian men into a meat grinder that has been the front line in Ukraine. The Russians have made some very minimal incremental progress on the battlefield, particularly within the last week in the east of Ukraine, but it's come at a very, very heavy cost. So I do not anticipate that the Russians will be able to defeat Ukraine, given the challenges that Russia still has, despite the many challenges that Ukraine faces as well. The Ukrainians are fighting for their right to exist, and I think that's where you see this will to fight that is a part of the Ukrainian fiber that will continue to block Russian advances.
What do you then make of America's posturing and positioning ahead of that summit?
Well, the president has said that there will be severe consequences if he concludes that the Russians are, in fact, not sincerely interested in peace. Let's remember, this is the same president that was the first American president to provide lethal assistance to Ukraine. It was not President Obama when the Russians took Crimea. It was not President Biden when the Russians invaded again. It was President Trump that provided lethal assistance. It was also President Trump that stopped the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So he has been very clear-eyed and willing to use a variety of measures to, in essence, protect American interests and to inflict pain on Russia. I see that that's a possibility again, particularly in the economic arena. The fact that he is willing to use secondary sanctions against countries that are buying Russian products, particularly China and India, I think would be another lever that he would be willing to pull in order to inflict pressure on the Russians to come to the negotiating table. It has also been very clear that Trump has been very straightforward with the NATO alliance in terms of military support to Ukraine. And there has been a breakthrough now in the European countries buying American military hardware to then supply to the Ukrainians. So there are still things that the United States can do to bring pressure upon Russia.
Right. There have been a number of voices and statements regarding the lack of participation and the Ukrainian president not being included in those talks. But from here onwards, of course, we'll be keeping a close eye on which way things go during those negotiations and those talks. But the fact that Ukraine is not a part of these talks directly at this point, what do you make of that? Because there has been a lot at stake here, and what all of this really means for Europe at large as well.
Well, as I said on the onset, I view this as the first step along a path to lead to a ceasefire and hopefully a more permanent peace. At the end of the day, the warring parties are Russia and Ukraine. They will have to get together, obviously, to negotiate details. If it comes to that, again, and that is an if, but you have to be willing to take a first step to kind of set the foundation for that. And President Trump has been willing to set that foundation. He's also said very clearly that he will, after his meeting with Putin, call President Zelensky to give him an outbrief, and that he will speak with our his key counterparts within NATO as well. And he's talked to a variety of European leaders in preparation for this meeting. So, so this is not just the Americans being able to, in essence, establish a Pax Americana upon Ukraine and Russia. There will be other players, and the most significant of which, of course, is going to be Ukraine. Ukraine gets a vote.
Right. Let's also talk about the significance of the Russian president on American soil and the aspect of Alaska being chosen as the summit venue.
So I think fundamentally, it's relatively speaking a midpoint between Moscow and Washington. I think another factor of consideration is, Putin is in fact an indicted war criminal. So the fact that he does not have to not only transit a third country, but go to a third country certainly alleviates those challenges as well. And then the fact that this is being held on an American military installation in Alaska allows the U.S. government to, a large measure of control. So I think from a logistical perspective, it makes absolute sense. I think there's a certain amount of symbolism by having the backdrop for some of this video montage being F-22 fighters, and when the president welcomed Putin on the tarmac, there was a B-2 stealth bomber flying overhead, the same type of aircraft that the United States recently used to go after Iranian nuclear facilities.
Yes, and let's also talk about the fact that the meeting taking place in itself is, like you said, it is a significant step. What's happened in the run-up to this meeting, though, and the conversations that have taken place? What is your impression of the Russian position? Because earlier in the evening itself, we had that statement coming in from the Russian side, for example, talking about how their position remains clear and unambiguous. What do you think the Russian president has gone into this meeting with the expectation of? Because, of course, that land swap that the American president has also spoken about has been a very crucial aspect.
Well, Russian negotiating tactics are no secrets. The Americans have been well experienced dealing with the Russians and the Soviet Union before that, and whenever there are negotiations that are about to occur, the Russians always have maximalist demands. The key here, of course, is understanding that it's a starting position and not conceding anything in advance. So the United States has not conceded anything in advance. Again, as I just mentioned, the Ukrainians do in fact get a pivotal vote, but I think it's also realistic to understand that there is going to be no winner in terms of Russia or Ukraine in this. They will both have to make some concessions, and that is going to include land. It's not realistic, as unpalatable as it may be, but it is not realistic for any of us to expect that the borders of Ukraine will revert back to what they were prior to the Russian invasion of 2014. So that's just the facts on the ground do not support that happening. So let's see how anxious the Russians are, in fact, to bring this war to an end that is creating incredible economic difficulties for the Russian people, as well as causing hundreds of thousands of casualties now. Let's see how desperate they are to come up with a deal. But at the end of the day, I do not foresee Kyiv or Moscow being 100% satisfied.
Right. A lot of expectation and so many lives at stake here. And what happens during those talks holding far-reaching implications, not just for the Russia-Ukraine war, but for the entire world as well. We're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us with those perspectives. Of course, we're keeping a close eye on the minute-by-minute developments